And welcome to Life Support Live, the weekly Star Trek show that helps you to boldly go in your own life to better yourself and the rest of humanity.
As the famous starship captain once said, and as a fellow, but different time period, starship captain also once said, wherever our mission takes us, we'll try to have a little fun along the way.
Hello, everyone. I am psychologist Dr. Mattu.
And I'm Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek. One of us is a real doctor.
I wonder which one that could be. One of us should know who that is.
Stay
Otherwise, their license might be in suspect.
It's a crapshoot. Every day it's a crapshoot.
On this week's episode of Life Support Live, it's a special edition, folks. Sto-vo-kor just welcomed a new Klingon warrior, and so we are going to be celebrating the story of General Chang and an identity and what that means for all of us.
Wait, who?
General Chang.
Who?
Larry, there's this great movie. You got to watch it. Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. There's a lot of Shakespeare in it.
Oh, you mean Christopher Plummer?
Christopher Plummer.
Oh, the
one and
dad
only.
from the lake house.
Or the wonderful father from The Sound of Music.
Okay.
Folks, let us know. What's your favorite Christopher Plummer role? Sadly, he passed yesterday.
Don't have a that watches The Lake House all the time because it's far Star Trek VI in this household now.
Or you can go with Up. He plays a little bit of the villain in Up. So, folks, what's your favorite Christopher Plummer role? Let us know. And Larry, if this is someone's first time here at Life Support Live, what can they expect? What is this?
Just a little bit of everything. Hey, everybody. Welcome again. And if you are new here this week, thank you for finding us. No, we go boldly through uncertain times. We look at Star Trek. We geek out through a mental health lens, or we look at mental health through a geeky Star Trek lens. One of those two. I'll figure it out someday. But we have a lot of fun, and we have a great community here. Join in the chat. We pick a theme every week. We've even been known to have watchalongs. We've even been known to have a guest or two. So, yeah, we've only been going since the COVID times, and we're going to plow ahead with that, uncertain as they are. So I'm glad you found your way here. Hopefully we'll send you away with a lot of fun, maybe something about Star Trek you didn't know, maybe something about life, the universe, and everything that you didn't know. So buckle
42,
up.
that's all you need to know, Larry. That's all you need to know.
No, 42 has been adjusted for inflation. 47. But today is show number 43. So we're right in the sweet spot here. Yes.
Oh, yeah. If you want to know the secret of life, it's episode 42 that we did last week. I think that'll cover it. Or at least living with all the technology.
Crossing the streams. Okay. So we were talking this week, and we thought somebody in the chat, hey, and if you're not there already, please go like our Facebook page, our group page, Life Support Live. The community carries on there. There are people there who have never even been here live yet. But we talk about the shows there. We have a lot of fun there. And this week, we had ideas for themes. And then, yes, Christopher Plummer passed. Great long life and career. And there were some people saying, we should do a watch-along of 6. But, movies take a lot out of the show and a lot out of our talk time. So we thought, why don't we pay homage to him and Chang and Star Trek VI, but do it with our more thematic approach?
Yeah.
So what did you come up with, Ollie?
Oh, I have so much, Larry. I have so much for us today. I mean, Christopher. I think you said it well. What a wonderful long career, from The Sound of Music to Star Trek VI to Knives Out. As recently as I think Knives Out might have been one of the last movies I saw before the pandemic, and what a joy that movie was. It was so much fun. I have a lot to say, so I'm gonna have to. You might have to hold me back, because Star Trek VI. This is my origin story. My brother took me to go see a matinee, a doubleheader matinee thing, and it was Addams Family and Star Trek VI. And I was more interested in seeing the Addams Family. I had no idea what Star Trek was. Nothing. I had seen Star Wars.
What?
Nothing. I had never seen anything Star Trek before
I just mean you must
that.
be young. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on the younger side. I had seen Star Wars, but Star Wars kind of scared me a bit because so many people were losing limbs, and every movie it seemed like
Oh,
someone lost
and
a
Jar
limb.
Jar.
Um,
Yeah.
no, this is well before Episode One,
I
Larry.
know, but
Come
he's the
on now.
punchline. He's the punchline.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Um, so my brother took me to see this double feature, and Adam's Family was, it was fine. But then Star Trek Six, the lights went down, the opening crawl, and then the explosion of Praxis and the Excelsior caught up in that shockwave. I was hooked. I was hooked from that moment, and seeing the crew work together to solve this problem. I was so intrigued by it. I was so intrigued by the villain. I was so intrigued by the ships. I was so intrigued by the ideas. And on the drive home, my brother was asking me, "So what you think?" And I'm like, "Wow, that was great. I really liked it. Oh my gosh, what a fun movie." And he said, "Well, it's that was Star Trek 6, right? That means there's 5 other films." And I'm like, "Oh, that's what that means? I thought it was Star Trek
I can see little
VI." Yeah, and I was like, "I thought it was Star Trek VI." This makes a lot more sense to me. I didn't know Roman numerals. I didn't know what that meant.
It's a space term. I don't know what that was. Yeah.
Yeah. That was something Starfleet. And so I think either that weekend or the following weekend, my brother and I went to Blockbuster Video. We grabbed all the Star Trek movies we could. We started watching them. And I got to tell you, Larry, it was very confusing for me to watch Wrath of Khan. Because I'm like, wait, how does he die? How does Spock die? He's back in Star Trek 6. I'm so confused. And then my brother's like, well, we got to watch Star Trek 3. It's called The Search for Spock. I'm like, oh, man! And so this movie really changed
like a new watcher. Yes.
This movie changed the direction of my life because it led me to Star Trek. And then Next Generation was airing at that time, so then I devoured Next Generation and syndication, and also the reruns and the new episodes. And so it's very hard for me to be rational about this movie. I just rewatched it last night too. It's very hard for me to be rational because it's I have nothing but love for this film.
Yeah, and well, we had talked about our reaction to the film. So 6 was I had seen the 5 movies prior.
yes, and you had seen a few episodes too,
and a couple of episodes. 5 to okay, so fine, all 79, a few cycles around after school. But and 6 was one that and Next Generation had been on for a couple years here. So it wasn't. I hadn't worked on anything. I was still in Oklahoma. I was still back home. But it was right on. This came out at the 25th anniversary, so this the 2-part unification had been on just before this, and this was happening, and I think this was all what happened. So so I was like on the verge. I didn't know it, but I was on the verge of getting the deal to write the first edition of the Next Gen Companion, like within months. But for the last 3 or 4 years, I'd be getting press releases from Paramount for the shows for Next Generation. And, Deep Space Nine was being rumored about going into production. So it was all a very busy, active time, probably second only to 86 and 94. And, but I remember going, because I knew, they've got Michael Dorn in it, but he's playing his grandfather. Okay, stunt casting, But I went, I enjoyed it, and here's old fogey fanboy me. I did not appreciate phasers in the galley. I did not appreciate getting books out to look at Klingon. There were 2 or 3, which Nichelle Nichols didn't like either, I found out later. It's retconned away. Oh, the universal translator use would have given them away somehow because, I don't know, they're not smart enough to mask it somehow. Anyway, enjoyed the story. I really loved the whole Cold War. The wall was coming down. Chernobyl had happened. That was what this was. All that happened, and that was all part of the writing DNA. So I enjoyed the story. I actually was still such a hardcore. I had not been beaten down by the Hollywood reality yet that I was sitting there going, well, It was awesome, wonderful performances. The story was great, but visually, I wish it had just been a radio play. That was actually, then we wouldn't have to have mashed potatoes in the galley, which I know there's a hobby kitchen. I know all that, but still. So anyway, so yeah, that was my reaction. And then like within a couple of years, it was like, oh, get off your high horse and enjoy. I enjoyed it. It was like the after Wrath of Khan and probably 2, 4, and 6. I mean, it's a package. It's the other trilogy. That's not really a trilogy.
Well, and that's what we were rewatching it last night.
Love the signatures at the end. So,
oh my gosh, the signatures at the end will bring a tear to me eye.
Mm-hmm. I'm amazed no one's ever paid homage to that.
What? Wait, what was it recently?
Lower decks.
Lower decks. Right. Thank you. The thing that stuck out to me last night, Larry, as I was rewatching Undiscovered Country, in preparation for this, and also just because I wanted to.
You're partial.
It's that time of 6, though. It's that time of week. I'm very partial to 6. Yeah. Again, I'm never going to be able to be rational about 6. But the thing rewatching it is, I love that it really does tie together a lot of stuff. So it brings us back to the Wrath of Khan search for Spock. The line where Spock says, "I've been dead before." The reference to Kirk losing his son.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of references that go back to Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, to the voyage home, and Kirk being demoted. I think a lot of the films, with the exception of probably the motion picture and Final Frontier, get some kind of reference in Star Trek 6. The other heavy lifting that Star Trek 6 does, here maybe I can be a little bit critical of Star Trek 6. There is a lot of heavy dressing of Star Trek The Next Generation sets. Maybe a little bit too...
That didn't bother me as much as the other, but I get it. Yeah, I'm just like, oh, look, they redressed 6 because they're on a budget and they're saving money and they're being scrimpy. But it bugged you.
And then only on this rewatch I noticed it more. I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot. Like engineering. Could Scotty get his own engineering, please? Can we just like... That's the Enterprise D Warp Core. Come on, folks. Anyways,
he's just standing there smiling, so it's
he loves looking at a warp core.
I mean, even sent that to you.
Yeah. Don't we all love looking at a warp core? But what the other?
It's the best part of the ship.
It is. The other. Let me put that image up right now. What a lovely. What I love about this image is the officer to the screen right of him is just looking at Scotty like what's the deal with you? Whereas the engineer to the left, I'm sorry, the officer to the right is like, what's going on? While the engineer to the left is just like, oh, like probably the first time that officer is seeing the warp core at full blast. Anyways, the other heavy lifting that 6 does, it is showing us the beginning of the Khitomer Accords. It is tying how we get from the original series to the Next Generation and peace with the Klingons. So and as you said, Larry, there's the social commentary about Chernobyl and the fall of USSR. I mean, it's a send-off not only to the original series, but also we see this element of the original series moving forward with the Excelsior. The Excelsior is no longer a prototype. It now has Sulu at the helm, which is tying it back to the voyage home when Sulu sees the Excelsior and Scotty's like, why would you want that bucket of bolts? This movie really, it's a very nice send-off for the original series cast. When Nimoy said about Generations, he was invited to do it, but it was more of a cameo, and he said, I really felt like we had a good send-off in Star Trek 6. We wrapped everything up. And that's what it feels like. The signatures at the end, second star to the right. If I was human, I would say go to hell. I mean, there's all these moments that are just... if you've been watching this crew...
You've never heard Shakespeare until you've heard him in the original Klingon.
Bah! Ba-ba! Ha! be or not to be. He quotes a lot of Shakespeare.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
It's like all Chang says is Shakespeare lines. What a way to live when you're only communicating in Shakespeare lines. That's
and you got David Warner in this besides Christopher Plummer too.
Yeah. Oh, and Charlotte just reminded me, Captain Sulu to the rescue. My I remember when I was watching this movie and Kirk goes, fire, and that photon, it's going all around, and then you see that explosion, and then inside, little Ali was going yes, and then camera close up on Sulu, quick cut to Sulu, close up, target that explosion and fire. Oh, Larry, I lost it. I went. Oh man, that
Just think,
what a
all
crowd!
This time, what two ships could have done?
Yeah. If the
Like
Enterprise
U-boats.
wasn't always,
What a
if the
concept.
Enterprise wasn't always the only ship in the quadrant, this is what could have been possible.
Yes, much more violence.
Yeah. So, a ton of fun for me. I know this movie. And Larry, help me to understand the director's cut. I have the director's cut. I watched the theatrical cut last night because that's the one that was on streaming.
Yeah.
I actually got to meet Nicholas Meyer at a release for his director's cut back in 2004 or 5, whenever that was. And I got to tell him how much this movie meant to me. He was super nice and generous. But the director's cut changes some things. And some for the better, and some I think are a little bit more choppy. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There's
the
a lot
international
more
symbol for Scooby-Doo. No, this is the international symbol for Colonel West.
Yes, yeah, it really is. And the also the during the interrogation scene, there's also flashbacks. So help me to understand that. Were those all Nicholas Meyer's cuts that he wanted, or how do we get from the theatrical to the...
I'm not as familiar on that. Somebody in the chat might be. It's very easily traceable. I can sit here and look it up and tell you. Somebody watching will probably do it faster than I can. But no, he was... The whole... I keep forgetting at the time, and I have to go back and read it. I was really kind of shocked to read it. It was like, you're well aware of all the machinations behind all the other movies. And this is the one that I forget how... It's like Paramount Pictures changed ownership, like who was running the studio, like 3 times while this thing was in production. And the movie was actually canceled once. Maybe I'm K3ing too much here.
No, but, you can never... Dr. Drake, you can never K3 too much.
If the third head of the studio making decisions hadn't been a Trek fan, this might not have ever been made. Because for at least a day or two, this was technically canceled. Because Nick Meyer was standing up for a budget that he'd been promised by person A, who was no longer there, and they were quibbling over like $2.5 million out of 30. Like 27 million, no 30, no 27 million, no 30. Okay, then we won't say it to your face, but we're canceling. We're gonna pull the plug. And then he was like, it was just like Picard in Picard. Oh, they called my bluff. Oh. But it was interesting that some of the studio brass did not want to end with 5 and have that be the last Star Trek movie. But Paramount was a lot like it is now. It was in upheaval and was not as well settled. This was a savior movie for them. It actually, did. But they were so burned by the return on 5 that people were on eggshells, and there was just a general malaise at the studio anyway. But it's like you forget that happened that way, and then that is why all your budget cuts are there. There were plans to have action. There was actually a whole prologue that was going to show, that was scripted and storyboarded, that was going to kind of show what everybody did after 5, and some of it was really hokey. So I'm almost glad Uhura was going to have her own galactic radio talk show or something where she's the host, and anyway, it was going to be some of the things were hokey, but the Scotty segment was about Scotty working on the refits and everything, and
that makes sense.
Yeah, some of the pieces there were a couple of plot points that they tried to get it, but then they scrapped the whole thing and saved 5 million or whatever, 2 million from doing that.
Well, they got
But
to the
there was
action
a lot
real
more
quick.
Sturm and Drang on this. But one of those things when you're talking about how good this movie is, I was going to mention this eventually, but this is Nick Meyer's book,
Hmm.
The View from the Bridge, where he talks about he came back to the franchise, 2,
Yeah.
and then limited role 4, not directing but just writing, and then 6 again, writer and director. And there was machinations on the writing, which were caught up in the studio politics. But you see that DNA. You're talking about harking back to things from the past. There's Nick Meyer. You would think with a stupid movie series, it would be easy to do call outs and shout outs and continuity. It's not like you're writing 26 shows a year for 7 years.
Right. Right.
It ought to be pretty easy. But that's the main reason you've got those touches is
Yeah.
it's because a common thread called Nick Meyer. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Who is still very much still with us. It is a great guy, and if you ever get a chance to see him live or talk to him, he's awesome. Yes,
he's really lovely, and that makes a lot of sense. That helps me to understand the budget and the sets and all of that. Maybe we should. Scott says it's one of his favorite books ever. That's a big big endorsement. Was that did that book come out before Star Trek Discovery? I'm assuming he probably doesn't talk about his...
This is from 2011, 2012.
Okay, so yeah, he doesn't talk about his role with Star Trek Discovery, which I know is also wibbly wobbly. But Larry, maybe we should dive into General Chang a bit. And Larry and I were thinking,
is it time to put up one of our things?
Yes, I'm always happy to put up one of our things. Let's put on. I'm gonna put on this image right here of General Chang and Captain James Tiberius Kirk here. Let's dive into Chang.
Oh, I meant
a
like
bit.
the mission briefing or our briefing.
Oh, that? Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Because I always like fooling.
Hi,
everybody. I always like fooling everybody with us for the first time. Like, do these guys just like ramble for 2 hours? What do they do?
Well, every episode.
A little madness to the method. I mean, the other way around.
Every life support episode, we have to begin with completely gushing about our love of Star Trek. Apparently, we were talking about what's a theme with General Chang, a mental health theme that, as we do on the show, is relevant to our current times and can help us to boldly go in some way. And this image is really the one that that sticks out to me of Chang and Kirk, because the story, as it relates to right now, is this story of identity and who you are and what you do because of your identity. And I know I'm throwing a lot here, but there are many times when these two are facing off that, and even actually before, let me see well,
it's a thread to everybody for a certain extent. And to pile on what you just said, we're talking about how this is a corollary, it's a metaphor for the end of the Cold War, the wall coming down in Chernobyl, like literally, figuratively, if it's an homage, if it's a metaphor, but it's actually like, Praxis explodes, Chernobyl explodes, and it sends that political entity into a spiral.
Yeah.
And the rest of the world has to come, the rest of the whatever has to come and help them, and will they accept the help and all of that, and how secretive are they about it? So that's the hand. But like you say, the meta to this, which makes it applicable to any time, is this idea of identity. And we all have an identity, but are we are we prisoners to it? How does it get in our way? How does it give us a platform for strength, and how does it weaken us and
absolutely
doom us to failure?
Yeah, if you look at it from a Star Trek perspective, Praxis has been overmined. It's exploded. Kronos only has 50 years of life ahead of it without any outside intervention. The Klingons can't afford the war anymore, the hostility, so we're going to negotiate a peace. Similarly, the USSR, Chernobyl happened. Chernobyl's not what brought down the USSR. There's a lot of things that are happening there, but the USSR was crumbling. The Cold War was over. And so what happens now when Americans and Russians have been in this Cold War with each other for decades. And what happens
50
when,
years.
when Starfleet, which the version of Starfleet that Kirk has most been a part of, has been a little bit more militarized than the Starfleet that Picard is a part of. And what happens when hostilities with the Klingons end? Chang talks a lot about. There's so many great quotes I took note of last night.
Cairo's posted one here at the beginning. In space, all warriors are cold warriors.
All warriors are cold warriors, which is a nice little nod to the Cold War there as well. But he talks a lot of Chang in his in that dinner scene. Let me put that image up right over here. He's sitting right next to Kirk. We've got Gorkon on one side, and this is just beautiful staging, Larry. On one side you have Chancellor Gorkon and Spock, who have been negotiating peace, and on the other side you have Kirk and Chang, these two warriors who've been at each other's throats. You know, when Kirk first sees the Klingon battlecruiser, he says, "I've never been this close." Can they step out of their role?
Actually, he had, but that's okay.
I know. I was thinking that too. I'm like, really, Kirk? Okay. They are kind of like right under the belly of.
Well, the ships are. I thought, if he's talking about him personally, I just wanted to sit down at dinner and look around, and go, nobody get a hot hand and shoot a Klingon that jerks. Okay, I just go back to Day of the Dove there.
They're so.
Yes.
You know what Chang says, from one warrior to another, would you be willing to give up Starfleet? And before Kirk can answer, Spock interrupts and goes, "I believe what the captain means." And then Kirk is like, "Let me talk for myself, dude. What are you doing here?"
Yep.
But this fear that the Klingons have that this peace is going to lead to the annihilation of our culture. So what's happening here is, given these galactic changes that are afoot, the Klingon.
I got that line, the culture line. It totally resonates with T'Kuvma at the beginning of Discovery, when it's all about the culture of Klingons and not,
Yes. Yes.
That would be 30 years later, 20, 30 years later from the events of Discovery, but still the pilot.
There's a lot of moments where it connects with canon. The Discovery moment is one. I think it also connects with the Augment storyline in Star Trek Enterprise, and what is this going to mean to their culture to have this retrovirus that kind of more humanizes them. By the way, I love the leading theory that... So Christopher Plummer was a huge Star Trek fan. He didn't take much convincing to step into this role, but he did say, "I don't want to wear all that makeup. I think it looks hokey." Right. I think he's a descendant of a Klingon that was affected by the retrovirus. Which is why he has all of that.
He's such a light touch, and why he's so adept at Shakespeare.
Probably at Shakespeare. Yeah. But the culture moment, it's a big one, and this is what happened. You were K3ing a lot. I'm getting into the counselor's log a little bit. When our group identities are threatened, they become more active. So when your status as a people, as a culture, as one of your identities, when it's threatened, it comes way more to the forefront, which is exactly what's happening with Chang. You know, how am I going to be a Klingon if I'm at peace with my enemy? And Kirk is struggling with this a little bit as well. What would Starfleet look like if it is demilitarized? In that briefing, is it the Admiral? It's not Admiral Cartwright. It's who's the
CNC. Yeah,
the CNC.
They never give him a name. Yeah.
The CNC.
He's a cinch for the role. Yeah.
By the way, I'd like to remind you this meeting's classified. We get it. You've mentioned it many times. It's classified. We get it. But he says, our our peacekeeping and exploration missions will still be intact, but yeah, we're probably going to demilitarize. And Kirk's like, what's going on? So
the Borg are coming in 100 years. Okay.
Then we'll make the Defiant. But there's a strong element of identity here, and what happens to your identity when it's threatened. And that's a beautiful through line throughout this film.
It was sad that the budget had to cut the exterior shot of all of those Klingon and Federation protesters storming the Khitomer peace accords.
Oh my gosh.
Bashing in the windows.
Oh my gosh.
And threatening to come take everybody hostage and even assassinate. Oh, wait. It's a future homage. It's a future homage to January 6th.
What?
Okay.
What parallels we have here?
I thought about that one. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're both scaring me, and you're correct, Larry. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this today. Is there's a lot of parallels to right now, and so we see it. We see it with a lot of these characters. So Admiral Cartwright. I'm going to put this up. We find out... Admiral Cartwright / Joseph Sisko. We see this with his character as well. How his role is very much threatened as well. His identity is threatened. And him, along with the Romulan ambassador, as well as General Chang... have really orchestrated this. What do we even want to call it?
Conspiracy?
Conspiracy. There we go.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on the Klingons, yeah. And then Colonel West, who had nothing to do with the Wild Wild West.
Slash Odo.
Slash Odo, yeah. Which was a little, you talk about your difference between your theatrical, which wasn't, and your director's cut, which was. Whether you're going to unveil pre-Odo Rene Auberjonois' character is. I mean, the budget, the cheap budget parts of this movie when they're having the briefing and he's flipping over paper charts.
Right.
It's like 1991, and I'm kind of cringing. Like, really, like paper, really? I mean, the charts are awesome and neat and very nerdy detail, and Mike. This was like his third movie, and he'd had 2 years of Next Gen, so he was nerding out on ships and planet names and in-jokes and stuff. But yeah, it's like, really? Okay. And Scotty sits down to a booklet of blueprints that are like really, or they're black prints, but they're like paper, really?
When Scotty's just kind of studying, he's in the lounge, just studying what looks like to be the most basic schematic of the Enterprise I have ever seen.
Hey, we're never too big to take a few refresher courses.
Why is he looking at this paper schematic? It's like less detailed, Larry, than the poster I had in my room of, the cutout poster of the Enterprise. It's got less details here. What is he looking at?
It's only page 1. It's like, yeah, it's got a coffee ring. I love how he puts his cup down. I just went, there's going to be a ring on that paper.
Yeah,
look out.
I know. Maybe he's just using it as a coaster. Maybe he just he just loves the harmonics in that room.
Why, Ali? That'd be inhuman. Don't treat blueprints that way, man. You're daft. Have some respect.
Oh my gosh! Well done.
I know engineers; they love to wrinkle things. Yeah.
But there's other characters where identity's playing out. So we talked about Cartwright. Let's talk about Chancellor Gorkon.
And the idea here again is that identity. It's like we all have an identity. We can't walk away from it. We're a pile of jello. But are we like a prisoner to our identity?
Yes, exactly.
Are we hostage to it to where we cannot adapt and change? Because as you know, change is the nature of the universe.
I believe you're referring
to which one that is.
I believe you're referring to what I call the undiscovered country, the future.
Okay.
So let's talk about Chancellor Gorgon, because here we see a very different a very different individual
And
than.
you do know Gorkon Gorbachev, right?
I knew that. I forgot that. You reminded me of it right now.
You're welcome.
Yes, that's perfect. Another reason why this movie is just
Well,
chef's
thank
kiss.
you. I just happened to have come up with it as a memory. Okay.
Oh, Larry, you're always making these memories. So he is the leader of the Klingons. He is the Chancellor. Why? In his, it's such an amazing moment that after he's been assassinated, and McCoy like beating his chest when everyone kind of looks at each other like, my God, man, I don't even know his anatomy, but I imagine there's probably a heart here.
Are you doubting it's judgment in a crisis of my man McCoy here? What do you what?
No.
Is there anybody else in Starfleet history you would rather have in that moment? Yeah.
No. I completely, my hat's off to him for doing what he can in the moment.
It's his only real scene aside from the prison, so give it to him, please. Okay.
Yeah, I love how he appears on the bridge and he's like, "Are we firing on Klingons?" And then he's like, "Hold on, Jim, let me come with you. I got nothing else to do in sickbay. Let's go on this adventure together." And then Spock's like, "I'll come too." And Kirk's like, "No, I'm gonna need you to get me out of this mess because I think I'm gonna be headed to Rua Pente soon." It's like it's lovely in how it's done. But with his last breath, Larry, he doesn't reach out to his daughter. He reaches out to Kirk and says, "Don't let it end this way." Why does this man, in this moment, make one more overture to quote-unquote the enemy when we have General Chang, who seems to be more a prisoner to his identity as a warrior, when Chancellor Gorbachev is willing to give it all up. So what do you think's going on there? What's the difference?
I don't know, he's sat in leadership. Look, he got to this point. He's already gotten to this point. Well, they've got Praxis, they've got the doom staring them in the face. That's the motivation here.
Yeah.
And I also think it's because he's sitting in the chair. He's in the center seat of his whole empire. And he's got the weight of his people on his back, even in their archaic, high council. By the way, first time both Kronos is used, it's Kronos 1, which I don't even remember from watching the movie. I remember reading it later.
I love that. It's like Air Force One.
Yeah. So Kronos 1, that's the first time that term had been used and the first time they intended it to be the name. Because for years, everybody'd say, the Klingon homeworld, the Klingon planet, the Klingon homeworld, the Klingon planet.
Right.
And there's even a time, and Maury Hurley on Next Gen, when they were trying, one time he says, "Oh, you're the traitors of Kling." Like, the name of the planet is Kling. And the John Ford novels...
Those Klingons!
The Klingons. If you're on world, you're a Klingon. And if you've been banished, you're a Klingoff.
Klingoff.
But anyway, that's the first time the title Chancellor was used also. Because it's like, well, the head of the empire must be an emperor, right? And that threw people. And then they get back to, Next Gen figures, and good old Ron Moore untangles that one. Well, we used to have an emperor, but, and then now the emperor was a clone and Kalis is an emperor aside the... Anyway, a lot of Klingon backstory got established in the clunky way that I wish was still a radio play and not a movie, but still an awful lot of long-standing backstory. I'm sorry, I'm K3ing again.
Please, Larry, always K3. The way to my heart is through a K3. So please.
Who knew that when you shot a Klingon in null gravity, you got Pepto-Bismol? That their whole body.
I was gonna make that joke. I was gonna make that. I made a mental note last night. I was like, "Oh, there's a great Pepto-Bismol joke here."
I'm sorry. Did you change the script? I didn't get the pink pages. Okay.
Oh man. Yeah, I think you're right, Larry. His role is not a warrior. Like, if he is the
Yeah.
chancellor, he comes from a family, likely a noble family, who has not fought the wars, or maybe they have, but they are from nobility. They this is how we know the High Council works in this way. There are clans that are much more ruling class than
Well, there are
worker
higher
class,
ones,
and
and DS9 gets into that later on.
yep,
Martok is
yep.
from a lower family, and uh, Kur is from a higher family. Yeah.
Yep, yep, and Martok does not like Kor for all those reasons and how he was treated. But
Did
he,
I say DS9? Stick with 6.
hey, if
I
you're
did not mean
talking
to deflect you
TOS,
onto 9. I want to
hey,
say,
hey, hey, if you're talking TOS, you're eventually going to get to DS9 because it is the most TOS of the Star Treks after TOS. But his role has always been thinking about the Empire, what's better for the Empire. That's his identity, is really thinking about the Empire first. Whereas Chang is thinking very much as a warrior, as someone whose day to day has been about fighting these fights. And Kirk is struggling with the same thing. He's struggling with these ideas of revenge. He's struggling with these ideas of being a captain who has fought the Klingons over and over again. I think it's that moment when Chancellor does lean in or bring Kirk closer and says, "Don't let it end this way." I think something changes in Kirk in that moment, and that's when he's like, this is what you do with your last breath. This is bigger than me. I need to get over myself, because there is something, there's a much bigger problem we have to solve. I think in that moment, that overture, that last reaching out from the Chancellor is what changes things for Kirk.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it could be. And he's close enough to smell them, as Chekhov said. And as a deleted line,
Guess
one of the
who's coming
lines
to
from the
dinner?
dinner scene, that the dinner scene was supposed to be much more. It's really interesting, and maybe this is too much of a tangent, but the dinner scene especially was supposed to heighten some of the racism that was both political, culturism, and also echo even like American racism or apartheid. But some of the whole us them, the identity and being tribal was supposed to hit such a fever pitch that in the interests of diplomacy, and they are the hosts on the, they're not on the Klingon ship, they're on the Federation ship.
Yeah.
As hosts, that you would think, diplomacy, what if there's a White House state dinner and the president and the head of Russia start, well, that may have happened sometimes, but it's like it's at least like the kitchen debate, when Nixon and Khrushchev were going through the World Fair and they had the American kitchen there, and they get into that debate about who's better, Russia or the Soviet Union or America. But it's very pointed, but it's very civil. And they're like, ha 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 ha. Well, you may have better rockets, but we've got better washing machines. I mean, it's like in the moment it was a little bit bizarre, but they debated, but it stays friendly. And this gets out beyond that. But originally the scene was going to be a lot more pointed, and Nichelle, for one, did not want to use some of the token American racism lines, but in a Federation to Klingon context, because it was too close. It's like they couldn't be meta. It's like, well, it's a metaphor. Exactly. You're making a commentary about racism here, and us and them, and tribalism, and the other. And it was, and Brock Peters was the same way. Admiral Cartwright, he had some lines to say, hatred toward Klingons that were a lot like that too, and it was like all he could do to get through his speech, his long speech, where he's saying, his hate the Klingon speech. It's kind of echoing Kirk's darker thoughts before he's a conspirator, and he was having trouble just as a black actor saying them because he knew the origin of the lines, even though this is, anyway.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's the dinner scene is so uncomfortable for all those reasons. I mean, guess who's coming to dinner? Like, this is there are so many references in this, from, like, including the apparently Spock is a descendant of Sherlock Holmes, which is one of my favorite moments in this movie. I mean, we have Peter Pan references. There's so much happening in this movie. But that dinner scene is it's difficult to watch at times because of the language and because these are our heroes. And here's how they act face to face with Klingons, and here's what they're saying once they leave. You know, like, oh, the smell. Could you, like all of these, it's quite uncomfortable, and it's so true to the time. It's so true to what happens when identity can become weaponized in this way, in which it was with the Cold War, and it was with the Klingons and Americans, and in many ways it is now, which I'll get into more in the
easy for you to say that, you commie.
Man, am I glad I didn't live through that era.
Oh, you pinko commie, yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, let's talk about the Federation president as well here, Larry. We talked about Gorkon. The Federation president. What's his name?
He doesn't have a name here. They give him one in the books later, but he's just the president. Just like the president doesn't have a name in Star Trek 4.
Right. One of these days. Yeah. One of these days, I want a West Wing style Star Trek Council of Representatives movie.
I have wanted a Star Trek West Wing series for ages. You could do all the aliens and all the cultures, and you don't have to do a planet background every week. You could have everybody
go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love that.
And you could have the secret underground rebellion out in the Federation somewhere that resents everything being headquartered on Earth.
Right. Robert says his name is Fabio.
But another K3. So that alien race that you saw as the helmsman on the Saratoga in 4 that they bring back, there's a mini K3 right there. Then they bring it back this is Kurtwood Smith, who's Anarax, right? Mm-hmm. In Year of Hell on Voyager. And he played a Cardassian Thrax in the Odo throwback mind game thing episode early in DS9. But he's also, like Red from that 70s show. Great actor, Kurtwood Smith.
Right.
Yes, but that species, one of the line producers was Mel Efros, and they named that the informal nickname for that was Efrosians, named after Mel Efros, and then it stuck, and now everybody just, because there's nothing else, and it sounds cool, so now those are it's retcon totally, but we just call them the Efrosians now, and they do have bad eye. That the president had special glasses. There's a scene those dark
at the very end.
Had bad eyesight. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
and that's why he was in 10 Forward. That's why.
And his office is 10 Forward. Yeah, with the back. Who knew That's when Guinan has sports bar night and they're watching the latest water polo games in Parisi Squares. They just turn the artwork into a big TV and everybody makes bets in 10 Forward. No one knew that. That's in the 9th season of Next Gen. That was never. That Mike McMahon has not written about yet, that I will.
Well, what I like about the president and the Fed and Starfleet here, this movie is one of the ones that gets closer to helping us understand the distinction between Federation and Starfleet. And this gets wobbly throughout Star Trek, but Starfleet serves the government, which is a Federation, and Starfleet is this peacekeeping armada scientific exploration branch, which at times is more militarized and at times less militarized. But here we see a little bit of the conflict there between the military in Star Trek VI, the military aspect of Starfleet, which is seeing a major threat to what might happen if the bases are removed from the neutral zone, if starships are going to be redeployed, if would someone like Admiral Cartwright be kind of useless in this future? I kind of want to tell them, hey, you all have this border with the Romulans too. It's not like you're going, you still got some fights left to fight.
And there's the guys on the other side. You haven't met the Cardassians yet, so
yeah,
much less the Breen.
Space is big. You saw how long it took the Excelsior to get from Beta Quadrant to Alpha Quadrant. When Sulu's like, well, we're in Alpha Quadrant right now, Captain Kirk. It's gonna take us some time to get there. Space is big. Space is big. There's a lot of nefarious agents out there. But,
he was just in the hours days code. That's all he was doing.
Hours. Yes. I love that moment in Wrath of Khan. I think when it comes back to identity here, the president is really acting in his civilian role, overseeing the government, which is the United Federation of Planets. Mm-hmm. And Cartwright is very much acting in his role as what we would think of in the United States as like this Joint Chiefs council of military leaders. And you see some of that distinction and some of the conflict there between them and between those very different identities.
Yeah. Although you saw a CNC that I think of as, it's like, well, he's really over everybody because he runs the meeting. So it's like he's the Joint Chiefs, and then Cartwright is like the secretary or the active head of just under that or something. It's a little confusing, but anyway, when we get into K3 and we talk later on, I feel like the chat is, I want to say, everybody, I feel like we have looked at the chat less today than we have ever, and we're only talking about one movie, which is part of the problem. We've got such a great focus for 2 hours. But can I say real quick some of the things we've said real fast?
Please.
So I want to say hi to Josh Ball. I know you've been with us, but we were showing the Scotty image, and I almost said this at the time. The guy to his left was Max Cervantes. Josh says, I spy my pal, Max Cervantes, who was an extra for a while in Next Gen, but worked in the prop industry, still does. Works in the prop industry of fabricating, but he had 2 or 3 years of being an extra on Next Generation, and you see him a lot. But I'm
putting up the image right now. He's to the screen left of Scotty with the red collar.
I think that's it. He's so much younger than he looks now, but I think that's because the other side's a woman, and it's the the blacker haired person.
Yeah. He's the individual who's going like this.
I think so, which would be the fanboy thing to do because he was a fan also, as well as dream job.
I would be doing the same thing. Yeah, I'd be doing the same thing.
Anyway, so I just wanted to say that we're I'm trying to look for folks and catch up because the chat's just gone.
Well, while you're catching up, Larry, I'm just gonna cycle through some of the other folks we want to talk about here when it comes to identity. Another way in which this group identity plays out and role is with Sulu, is Captain Sulu. There's a great moment where Chris Slater, right, knocks on the door and says, "Hey, Captain, Starfleet's asking us like if we know anything about where the Enterprise is," and Sulu's like, "Tell them we don't know anything." And then he's like, Captain, he's like, "You have a hearing problem, sir?" Sulu is loyal to Captain Kirk and the crew right there. And to the point where he is not giving Starfleet the information they're requesting about the location of Enterprise. He also assists the Enterprise in giving the location of Praxis. And then literally comes to the aid of the Enterprise. Go faster, we'll fly you apart. Then fly her apart!
Then fly her apart. Then fly her apart then. Yeah.
So many great moments, but why is Sulu so loyal and willing to do all of these things? Well,
get everyone's name because an address, because we're going to reshoot this scene in about 8 years. Yeah. Actually, less than that. Yeah.
Well, from their perspective, they were going to reshoot that scene a few hours ago. So what's so lovely about this is it's another example of identity playing out, and Sulu's loyalty to Captain Kirk, to Mr. Spock, to the crew of the Enterprise, and how much he's willing to sacrifice and sort of break the rules because his identity as it relates to Kirk and crew is worth so much more.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You were going to make some points while I was looking at chat and looking some things up. So Hello?
I can make some more points.
Oh.
Who else do I want to talk about? We haven't talked about Valeris
you've
yet.
got Spock, you've got Valeris, you've got...
Yeah.
Valeris is the other big one, besides kind of the counterpoint to Chang, really, isn't it? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Ish?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of great moments between Valeris and Spock that in many ways feel a lot like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I think you'll probably get into this a little bit later, Larry. But the conversations between the two of them, Spock in this mentor role and Valeris as this new officer role, like, hey, we're not supposed to turn on our impulse engines in space dock, and Spock's like, Captain wants to go impulse. Let him go impulse in space dock.
Yeah.
But he is taking on this mentor role where he's saying, look, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. So one question I have for you, Larry, is why? Why does Valeris sign on for this conspiracy? Why does she see this as the logical path forward?
Well, she's in a way, this is a great statement of not humanity. How do we go? Bipedal lifeformity? I don't know. What do we say here to transcend?
The Homo sapiens only club?
Yeah. No, I'm trying to transcend that. Here's the great unifying thing about humans and Klingons, or the Federation species and Klingons, is they can all be equally, evil and corrupt. Look, we can all be united in our hatred of each other. I mean, that's basically what this is. It's like we're more comfortable in our,
We hadn't seen Star Trek Enterprise yet. We didn't realize how bad Vulcans can be to other people.
Well, that's growth. That's growth, which is what the point is. It's like wherever you are in your development, 100 years from, and then 100 years from later, you got Klingons and humans working together until Gowron's messing it up. But no, I mean, you said, well, how can Valeris be this way? And she was another one of Spock's, proteges, but she's on the young end. She hasn't spent decades at it like Chang, or Colonel West or Cartwright. She's young and knows no other thing, no other path in her life. And so she's terrified as a young person to think, which is weird because you usually think younger people are more adept and more flexible and they're more, progressive liberal. When you only get old and set in your ways when you've had a few decades to be set in your ways. And here she is being young, but it's the same mindset. So it's a real blow for diversity that young people can be just as stuck in their ways. And, even but talk about playing out the headlines. You're seeing there were a lot of young people storming the Capitol.
Yeah.
On January 6th. It wasn't just everybody over 50 or over 40. There were young people there too. So the idea, and that she's a Vulcan, how can she be that way? That's not necessarily a factor. So it's a great blow for diversity.
Well, it's I think it does highlight. You bring a great perspective here about age. That all the other conspirators really are. If you look at it from a lens of motivation and motivated reasoning, which is really about how your thoughts and your beliefs kind of follow. They follow the motivations and reinforcement and where in like how it might benefit you to have these different beliefs. We get how it might benefit Chang or Cartwright. They've been serving these roles for a long time, but Valeris is so young and can get young people, especially those who might feel more isolated and alone, are really vulnerable to ideology and are really vulnerable to to identities that might be very dangerous groups and can get
Because
brought
they haven't
into.
had time to thicken their own bark. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we all want connection to people, to connection to meaning, connection to important ideals, and sometimes the people who are most vulnerable to getting connected to very dangerous groups are the ones who are most isolated and alone. So maybe somewhere along the way, Valeris might have had good intentions, but got drawn into some of the wrong ideology, the wrong perspective of Starfleet. Yeah. And then, is there anything you wanted to say about the Chancellor's daughter? I'm blanking on her name. Do we get
Ajit
her? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so she becomes the new Klingon Chancellor.
Chancellor, which adds a whole wrinkle. As next gen developed, and they say women are never on the council. It's like one of those things about there were never any women in politics unless their husband was the governor or the senator, and let the wife fill out the term, kind of a thing. Like, because she's not there very long. And now we've got L'Rell as head of the Empire right before Kirk's years. And then there's another woman back later, but then 100 years later, Gowron and the Klingons at that time are saying there aren't women on the council. I mean, it's just more texture. People that want to get all balled up about that, and that's where my hashtag texture not trivia comes in. But no, she's of the same DNA as her dad, which is nice for consistency. That she's not going to be, not turned against her father's wishes, which makes, in a sense, in kind of a in a noble kind of way, that makes sense. That if he reared her with that kind of a mindset, that he, to be open to change, even while, trust but verify.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we go up and down. You go up and down the list, and not all of the, even Gorkon's party and the other generals, and some of them that had speaking lines. Some are with, not all of them are with Chang at the end. There's like all that frantic at the Khitomer conference, and the frantic chaos that happens after the assassination attempt, and Kirk's big hero moment, and he saves the president. And then everybody kind of, like, the waters kind of part, and you see who's over on, and Cartwright is like, oh, arrest these evil people, and they're like, no, we have your names. Give us the names. It's like a little McCarthy, which is a problematic scene. The whole interrogation, tortures, whatever you want to call it, torture, or you want to call it a mind rape, or whatever you want to call it. It's an uncomfortable scene, and maybe it's supposed to, but it is. But the fact that they go in having names on a list, so that he can't pull that innocent routine, down at the conference. But you notice there's like Klingons that are being drawn down on, and there are Klingons in uniform, some of them, and good old Colonel Worf, thank goodness, was not a bad Klingon. He was on the good side.
Yeah.
So there's something. So it always makes me wonder if that's his dad's father or his mother's father.
Colonel Worf.
Colonel Worf, yeah. Is it Moog's father, or is it his mother's father, whose name we don't know? I think. Anyway.
Yeah.
Lots of
we
layers
don't know.
here.
All we know is he looks and sounds a lot like Michael Dorn.
It's funny how that skips a generation and goes that way. But but this whole thing about being trapped by your identity rather than being served by, strengthened by it or trapped by it. It's a straitjacket you can't get out of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or your perception.
Valeris says, you've betrayed Starfleet, and later, towards the end, or not towards the end, somewhere in the middle, Kirk says to Spock, we're both extremists. Kirk for rushing in, and Spock's arrogance to logic. And Spock says, is it possible we've grown so old and inflexible that we've outlived our usefulness? But they've also, the two of them, see the problem in being so inflexible, and whether it's with the dying chancellor's last wish, don't let it end this way, or if it's by realizing that their time is coming to an end. The Enterprise is to stand down. The Excelsior is the future, to boldly go where no man, where no
Yeah.
one has gone before. They realize that they have served what Starfleet stands for, and
Right.
what Starfleet can stand for can change too. That's a little bit of what I hear at the very end when Kirk says, "Where no man, where no one has gone before." A recognition that Starfleet is changing, and he is going to step down and let the next generation, no pun intended, take the lead here.
Yeah.
Which Valeris does not. The new chancellor does, and so yeah. With that, Larry, anything else you want to say before we go into the counselor's log?
No,
here?
I just feel like we've kind of blathered more than usual today. And it's 20 after 11, so I'm just, or we're an hour and 20 in, so maybe we should move along.
Yeah. Let's do that. So let's open up the counselor's log. This is the part of the show where I do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the psychology that we've been talking about here. And I was looking through my notes, Larry. The last time we sort of talked about identity in this way, I think was episode 10 of Life Support Live, very long time ago. I don't know.
Wait, you know the numbers and the titles of the episodes?
Hey, thanks to
Wow, you're such a fan. Okay.
I'm a pretty big fan of the show. I always tune in every week. Saturday
You
morning.
like
I'm always here.
Okay.
But yeah, so
I'm here
some
for
of
you
this some of this I've talked about before, but it's been a while too. Group identity affects us all. Sometimes people talk about identity politics, but everything in politics is identity politics. It's all about group identity. And one of the things I mentioned before on the show is we like the groups we belong to, even when psychologists randomly assign people to different groups. And even when they tell people, hey, I'm randomly putting you in these groups, the dynamics that unfold is people like the group they're put in, and they tend to dislike other people's groups. And they make choices and actions that benefit their group and are not so good for the other group. So this stuff gets set up very quickly. We prefer our own groups. And one of the more dangerous things that happens is when mega identities are formed. And what a mega identity is when different identities are layered on top of each other, so that if you're in one, it also means you're in all these other sort of things, which is very much the situation we have in America right now, where if you're a Democrat, you're also likely live in an urban area. It also means you probably live near a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods. If you're a Republican, you're more likely to be in a more rural state. You're also more likely to live near a Cracker Barrel and different, like we eat different food.
A Waffle House.
We watch different media, and all of these things sort of get layered on top of each other. And if there isn't any intermingling of the groups, if it used to be possible that there were more moderate Democrats and more moderate Republicans who lived somewhat near each other, but as the decades have gone on, these identities have gotten farther away from each other and they've become layered on each other. And that's getting back to Klingons and the Federation. That's absolutely the situation we have there. Klingons are warriors. They live in their own space. They have very specific cultural beliefs. Starfleet they have their own thing. There's no real intermingling between them. There is a Next Generation, and then especially in Deep Space Nine we see that, but not here. That's part of the reason why this is so difficult. And what we know that happens about group identities is that they're often like a cloaked ship. You're not really thinking about your identity much. It's there, it's in the background. But the moment your identity is threatened, it comes to the forefront. The moment someone fires upon you, then it's like every aspect of your identity is completely engaged. So the most we saw this with the 2016 election in the United States. As identities started to get threatened, those identities started to get activated. A quote that I really like is from Ezra Klein's book, Why We're Polarized, which basically says, what he says is, the simplest way to activate someone's identity is to threaten it, to tell them that they don't deserve what they have, to make them consider that it might be taken away. The experience of losing status and being told your loss of status is part of society's march to justice is in itself radicalizing. And we see that with Kirk and Chang, when Chang says, from one warrior to another, would you be willing to give up Starfleet? We see this with the themes of Federation and Klingons, Starfleet versus Federation. We see this with Kirk and his identity as a father and an officer, and both of those things have been threatened by the Klingons. We see this in so many ways, and Larry, this relates to fandom as well. Tomorrow is a Super Bowl in the United States. And Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, we care so much about our identity to a team. And the moment someone says, the 49ers, they're a horrible team, I, for some reason, get very defensive. I'm like, what are you talking about? The 49ers, blah, 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 blah. We won all these games in the 80s and 90s. This stuff gets very easily activated when our identity is threatened. Trekkie versus Star Wars fan, TOS versus TNG, all this sort of stuff. So this is what's at play. A lot of this stuff is cloaked, is kind of in the background until you feel it's threatened, and then all logic goes out the door. And you will do things that might not make any sense, and they might be emotional, and you'll do whatever you can to protect your identity. And I'll talk about how to deal with that in a moment. But before that, I think it's time for a K3
That was
factor.
a very succinct counselor's log for such a far-reaching subject. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's we've spent so much time yapping away. But Larry, now it's time for you to yap. I'd love to hear about what you got for our K3 factor today.
Well, you have to remember that I'm not only blind to a split screen, I'm blind to any of the graphics and images you put up. So I'm just gonna.
Right.
So if you've got the order there,
I got the order.
I think I have the actresses first, right? So here's the thing: I was trying to apply this idea of identity that we wear as armor. And sometimes armor is protective and saves our life. But sometimes armor, just ask any medieval knight, sometimes it can be inhibiting too, If you want to look at the famous Gorn fight, it's like if that Gorn is so protected by his skin, he's like moving. He looks like a knight, right? He's like moving so slow, and Kirk just should have just been Indiana Jones and pulled out his pistols and shot the guy. But I was trying to apply this concept of identity being both our friend and our enemy for our own sake. To a couple of aspects of the deep dive here on Search for Spock. Just keep it to this movie, Star Trek. And by the way, if you are new to us this week, K3 is named for the K3 circuit, the K3 factor that's on McCoy's biobed. It's the only reference to mental health. It's a brain factor that he cites for mental health, for brain neurology and brain health. So this is my time to deep dive something the way Ali deep dives the mental health side of our geek out here. But I try to keep it with the theme and looking at identity. Yes, identity. It's really interesting how Six played. I was rereading some from Nick's book last night, but it's really interesting how the whole thing of Valeris as a character. Originally, Nick Meyer's take here was that they were originally going to bring back Savick. Because what more surprise reveal would there be than to have this character that you've known for a while be the one who turns out to be a traitor and a conspirator? And how could that be? And a protege of Spock, and she betrays Spock as much as she betrays the Federation, which is what Valeris winds up doing. It's the same character function in the story, but how much more weight would it have for Star Trek fans? And again, we're talking movie era, so it's not like she was around for 7 seasons and 140 gajillion episodes. It's only 3 or 4 movies. But the fact that they went to, that's why I have, so you've got this image up, right?
Yep.
So they approached Kirstie Alley about being this, but right at this point, she's at her high point on Cheers, and she's about to do Look Who's Talking movies, and she is in no mood to go back. And she was a huge fan. She was a huge nerd out. She put the ears on and knew all of her Vulcan stuff because she was a little nerd girl back in Wichita. And this was her first role. But now she's beyond this. Her identity as an actress and as a leading series actress who's about to do features, to me, it struck me that her identity, and then she's going to price her structure where she's out of their budget, and she won't come down. There's no sentimentality going on here. She's looking out for her career as a young actress, and her identity is such that she thinks this would be a bad career move. So, okay,
what about
fine.
Was Robin Curtis ever in the equation?
Robin Curtis, sadly, was never in which she talks about now being hurt by. Like, they never called her to play Saavik in that situation. Once this all, the statute of limitations was up 10, 20 years later, and this all got talked about publicly. Yeah. So they're not doing Saavik, and then on top of that, they're going to recast. They didn't really want to recast it for a third time, which means they didn't even think about Robin Curtis.
That would be bad.
Who was the last one to play the role, which is sad.
I mean, this is not Spider-Man. We don't recast the role 3 times.
Exactly. But then on top of that, Gene was fading by this time. This is like the year before he died.
Yeah.
He saw a cut of the movie 2 days before he had his fatal stroke, and told him he loved it. And then he went home and he had Leonard Maisler start writing up he was very upset by some of the extreme racism comments, even though that was the point, that it was meant to be racist to get you mad and point up the drama so that the anti-racism side could prevail. The open-minded side of reaching out and détente, could win out. So basically, between Gene's comments about he did not want Saavik, a beloved character, to be poisoned this way as a reveal, which Nick Meyer thought was hysterical because he created Saavik, not Gene. But between not wanting it to be Saavik and not being able to find anyone to play it, they reached out to Kim Cattrall, who actually they had reached out to early, among other actresses. But when she thought it was going to be Saavik, she did not want to be the third actress to play Saavik. But once they decided for it not to be Saavik, then she said, okay. So it's like her identity armor here was her pride. I don't know. Is there a link between identity and pride here? Her pride about it, her identity was, I am not an actress that comes into a role for the third character to play that role. Like it's the 8th season of a bad sitcom or something. It's fading, whatever. Or somebody got, the second person got fired for ethics problems, and now I'm going to come in and take it home for the last season or something. So her ethos was not to play Saavik, but if it's a new character, okay, I'll do that. And came in and made it, and then, and took it over. And Valeris, little K3, Eris was the Greek goddess of chaos.
Ah.
And then she came up with Val, even though Val is not, T'Pring, T'Pol, to whatever. Vulcan names suddenly got diversified. Anyway, so that's that. I know I've lingered long on this slide, but that's to me, that was like thinking of some of the weird little quirks of this movie and its story, and that's one of them, that we had identity, and apparently Robin Curtis had no identity with the casting people, which is sad. But then the other slide. And
before you get to the second one, a lot of love for Robin Curtis as Saavik from Jason, from Charlotte, from Scott, from Linda. Robin's performance as Saavik really adds a lot of layers to it in Star Trek 3. So it really is too bad that she wasn't invited to bring back the character.
And then I'll spend less time on this one, I promise. But another aspect here that you can even look at that, or you tell me, it's what struck me as I was doing some freshening up reading. And I had not been totally aware of this, but they reached out to, it's kind of like this returning curve of, here's Nick Meyer, and they knew it was going to be the last original series movie. They've got Nick Meyer doing it, writing and directing. to one degree on the front end and then directing. He reaches out to, oh, look what, the Wrath of Khan was just such magic, right? They really captured the lightning on that. So he reaches out to James Horner to do the score. And James Horner says, well, who's done much more since then in 6 years, 10 years, nearly 9 years. And James Horner says, well, my career has moved past Star Trek.
Oh.
So his identity was that Star Trek was this, fading lower franchise here. And I don't do Roman numeral sequel movies kind of a thing. So you want to call it snobbery?
Even though he did 3.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, he'd moved on. His career so I thought, well, there's a case where, it's not good or bad. It's just what it is. And now we can sit here and snort at that, or we can go, well, okay. But there's a case of identity. Then they reached out to Jerry Goldsmith, who, obviously wrote more themes and wrote 3 of the 4 Next Gen themes, the last 3, and had done the motion picture, which recycled for the TNG theme. But at this point, he said he had done Star Trek V. And at this point, he apparently looked at the Star Trek V lousy box office and said, no, I don't want to pile onto that. So then again, here's his identity. His identity is, I'm a leading Hollywood composer, and do I really want to get mixed up with this?
Yeah.
So then they reached out to a young composer named Cliff Idleman, who did the score and did a wonderful job, and that
it's nice
boosted
and haunting.
his career.
Yeah.
And so that boosted. He had enough of a feather in his cap enough of a resume to get on the radar, but then he went on and had, and maybe not Jerry Goldsmith or John Williams or James Horner, but he was probably his best score, if not one of his best, for 6. So it's another case of where there was negotiation, but people all felt like they're looking at their own identity, their vis-a-vis their career or where they are in life. I don't know if am interpreting this right here, but just the way that our identity affects our decision making, right? Even if it's not like this head-to-head relationship thing, it's taking into account how we, and then. Last but certainly not least, the last one there is of Nick Meyer himself.
Yeah. And
thinking, as opposed to Kirstie Alley, as opposed to those earlier composers, and, can't fault them for those decisions. That's just, to me, that's like day to day, your identity to yourself is affecting the choices you make. On the other hand, here's Nick Meyer on Star Trek II, who came in, Captain I Have No Ego to Bruise. He took 5 different bad scripts, but pulled the best parts of all the 5 when they're running out of time. Harv Bennett, for the first time, has been tasked to save this franchise and make a leaner, meaner, better movie than the bloated motion picture, which wasn't all Gene's fault. It had too many fingers in the pie. And they do. But here's Nick Meyer, who's written and done a movie, 7% Solution, right, and Time After Time. And he comes in, he has no ego to bruise. He's like, fine, I don't care about the writing credit. If it's all wrapped up in Writers Guild, blah, 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 and we need to give the credit over here, I'll just direct it. He was flexible enough with his identity where that was not a deal breaker. He didn't get up and take his toys and leave the room. And he worked on other projects. He comes down to 6, and it's between the studio being in chaos and turning over 3 sets of leadership while he's doing this. He's meeting they reach out to him. Leonard reaches out to him. They're going to make Leonard an executive producer. And he pulls him in. They hash out the story. Basically, Leonard says, what about Chernobyl and the thing with the Soviets right now? And he totally just spits this out. They're walking on the beach at Leonard's vacation house in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And they come up with the basic story, like walking up and down the beach in one afternoon, and goes home. And somewhere along the way, in all the chaos of people and allies and writers who were paid to write a script by the studio and hadn't yet, and they bring in these 2 junior writers who not only waste time, but they don't make a great script. And then it goes back to what Leonard and I should say Adam, what Leonard and Nick wanted to do in the first place. All this is to say that the reason there's 90,000 names on this script is it went to arbitration. And at one point, Leonard and Nick were crossways because Leonard thought Nick was grabbing too much control. They found out that some of these were studio machinations where they hadn't told each other what was going on. The top dogs had not told Leonard or Nick what was going on. And they survived, and their friendship survived all that. They're good. But at the time, they were racing to get this movie done, and it was more friction than they needed. But my point here is that Nick Meyer's identity was such that, as opposed to some of these people, and it gets back to who are the conspirators in Six and who are the ones who can roll with the times. Can you roll? Is your identity such that you can digest that and roll with it? I go back to I have no ego to bruise, which is such a great line.
Such a great line. Yeah.
But here's a case for all these different people I've just mentioned. Their identity affected their decisions, and in Nick Meyer's case, his identity allowed his ego to flourish in a way that he was a collaborator. He didn't get hung up on all of that. He stuck up for his budget. He stuck up for other things when he needed to. But in a big picture, he didn't let any one thing blow up his own opportunities, much less jeopardize a project. Now, did I interpret your...
Absolutely, you did. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you mentioned pride, and pride is that thing. Is when your pride is injured, a lot of your identities can come up, and you can act in ways that might not be very logical at all. They might be very emotional, and I think these examples that you brought up are good ones.
Anyway,
I wondered.
Did I surprise you with anything? Did you learn anything today? Did I surprise you?
Saavik, I knew. The composer part is, I did not know James Horner was invited back. I also didn't know Jerry Goldsmith was invited back for Star Trek VI. I always wondered why Star Trek VI composer was someone new. I thought maybe it's because they wanted a different vibe for it, but this makes a lot of sense. So
it was like either use the next gen engineering set or get a completely different composer. Oh wait, we have to do both.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry, for that K3, and then I've got a very short away mission for all of us today. So this is
stop having identity. Oh no, wait. That's
right. There's this essay that really made its rounds a lot by folks like Ezra Klein. This essay from Paul Graham, who's a Silicon Valley person. The essay is called "Keep Your Identity Small," and the essay it's all about the advantages to keeping a small identity, to not latching on to some of these things. So the example here would be to, instead of considering yourself a Trekkie, to consider yourself someone who enjoys Star Trek shows and movies. I think that's very hard to do. I think it's very hard to give you any kind of sound advice here, because in some ways, latching onto an identity is the quickest way to change your behavior. There's a lot of research that's shown if you're trying to stop smoking, if your identity becomes I'm a non-smoker, it's easier to stop smoking. If you start to hang out with people who don't smoke, if you think of yourself as a non-smoker, similar to people who don't want to drink, if you identify as someone who doesn't drink, it's easier to not drink. So identity can also be a force for good, especially when you're trying to create healthier habits and things like that. And there's a lot of wonderful fandom that comes along with that identity of being like a Trekkie. I talked about that in the very beginning. It also can take nefarious roles, and we've got into that. I think episode 3 or 4 about Life Support Live was about some of the darker sides of fandom. So keeping your identity small, I think, it's a noble idea, but I think it's an extremely difficult idea. So the other direction I wanted to take this away mission is more about that moment where Chancellor Gorkon brings in Kirk and says, "Don't let it end this way." So there's some brand new research out. I believe the lead author was Emily Cuban. I'll post the link in our Facebook group later to this article if anyone's interested. But what these psychologists did is they reviewed a lot of research that's out there about cutting through political identities and what seems to be the best way to do that. And what they found is we're in this post-facts era, and logic and facts and information, it's not enough, Larry. It's not enough to cut through identity issues. If you're trying to have a conversation across identities, facts are suspect now. But what can cut through these strong identities seems to be personal storytelling that's related to the issue at hand and perhaps involves some story of personal threat. That when we hear stories from people across these identities that we have and their personal experiences, and that someone might tell a story about how their life was in danger, and this is why this issue has become so important to me. Those stories resonate with people, and it's not enough to change someone's mind, but it is enough for you to create respect for the other person, and that can open the doorway to understanding and then later negotiation and coming together. Facts are very important for policy, but they're not really important for respect. This personal storytelling that emphasizes some type of threat seems to be more important. So, for example, people whose lives have been impacted by school shootings, losing someone that they love, losing a child. This has made them passionate about issues related to gun safety, gun control. Similarly, coal miners who've been working in a town where their families have been coal miners for generations, and this is the only economic income in that town. This is why they have become so passionate about expanding coal mining. It's because it's the only source of livelihood for that community. This type of storytelling that is linked to experience and experiences of threat and safety, this seems to be one way to cut through identity. So my away mission for you all, and I don't recommend doing this unless it's important to you, I don't recommend having conversations across strong identities unless it's with someone with whom it's very important for you to maintain a relationship and you're willing to do the tough work, because this is tough work. But if you are in that situation, tell a story about why this issue is important to you. Tell a story about why it's impacted your life, why it's important to your sense of safety and well-being. Or ask the other person, why do you think this issue is so important to me? Framing conversations in this way can help us to cut through some of the identity mess. And I think it's exactly what happens when Counselor Gorkon brings in Kirk and says, don't let it end this way. These are ways we can cut through it, Larry. Facts, information, no, not anymore. But storytelling, personal storytelling, yeah, this can, even in an era where facts are suspect, people listen to your personal story and believe your personal story much more than facts. That's my away mission. Did I surprise you in any way?
Sorry?
Did I surprise you in any way?
No. It's just a real snooze fest. Every time I sit down here, it's just nothing ever surprises. No, it's hard. You have to find, to me, that thing about how do you cross a divide with someone and facts fail you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think just generically the way I try to do that is like for lack of a better term, come in from a third angle, because I think part of the divide is based on not only your identity of yourself, but your identity for the person you're facing off against. And this idea that somehow you've only been given a script for yourself, but you've been given a script for the other person. And if I can find a way to disrupt that expectation and go like, what? And come in from a third angle, and if some of that is, what you just said is finding the way to make the connection, facts are one thing, but sometimes it's like the facts that they expect, or the things that aren't facts that they expect that were lies, or they've been given a scenario or a character description that's not accurate. And that's part of the problem, is this false identity has been built up in the other person. Oh, anyway, just finding ways to, and not disruptive that's harmful or, leaves them so off kilter they can't function, but just you have to blow up the expectations so that once there's a little bit of a crack, you can come in, you can get your foot in the door. God, tortured metaphors here. You get your foot in the door as a perception and get some trust to build on. Because as long as you're just encased, if they've already cast you in concrete and there's no way to break out of that, then there's no way to bridge that divide either. And what you were just saying is I mean, part of that is, then the other thing is finding a surprise link, a surprise commonality that they didn't expect. That's
Yeah.
not part of the script they think that you're going to go by. But the
Right.
more I
Right.
can break out of the script they perceive me to be in, and the one thing that's easy is everything is so damn stereotyped and so damn predicted, and it sounds like a joke, but you can, like, oh, you just want to eye roll about this. But if you can take that as a weaponize that and use it to your advantage and come back and a surprise and much less a surprise commonality and find uniform, anything to
And
find some common ground with them.
that
Yeah.
common ground, Larry, that you're talking about is what the authors of that study, why this
Because then you
bed.
can't be an other if you have something in
Right,
common.
right, and
Yeah.
that common ground seems to be why stories related to threat resonate so much, because it's such a universally accepted fact that we all want to avoid danger. We all want to be able to provide for our families. We all want to have some sense of safety and well-being. So that's why those stories of threat might resonate so much. And that's why protests like the Black Lives Matter movement have taken off at points of tragic stories of loss. That these things seem to be very much in common. That the common link does seem to be a sense of safety and wanting to be able to provide for each other. Charlotte brings up a great comment here. I just want to say, speaking of mental health, one thing I've learned and I'm still trying to get used to is to not equate my mental illness with my identity. Instead of I am depressed or I am anxious, I try to say I'm a person dealing with depression, or I am a person living with anxiety, to remind myself that I am not my illness. Charlotte, that's a beautiful example here of how sometimes identities can be used for good, in terms of I am not a smoker, and sometimes how they can lead to problems, like I am a depressed person. If that becomes your sense of identity, it can also sometimes make it harder to overcome those problems. And that's also where some of we don't have the time to get into this, Larry, but some of the controversy around cochlea implants, implants that can allow deaf people to begin to hear. How this completely changes everything for the community, and why there's been controversy around that, because the deaf community is it's a community.
Wow.
It's an identity, and here's something that is now changing that sense of identity. So this stuff gets very complicated once you start looking at all the layers. It gets very complicated. And
Well, I know that to me, and I don't know the status of this, but to me, as a person who is straight, not gay, but I remember hearing just the debate in the scientific world, debating whether being homosexual or somewhere on that end of the spectrum as far as gender identity goes, that if that was DNA based or not.
Right.
Like you're
Right.
born gay. And for some people that was like a relief, and it was going to be a justification to, to finally have gender equality that way, homosexual rights in the original terminology. But then how a lot of people in the gay community resented that and didn't want it to be DNA based. And it sounds like that's an echo of what you're saying there with the deaf community not wanting the cochlear implants. But it's like, don't you welcome this? And it's like it's unsettling and
it's
different.
Complicated.
And,
It's very much complicated. If anyone's interested in the intersection between all of these things that we're talking about sexuality and mental health and also identity, a fantastic episode of This American Life is called 81 Words. It is the story of how homosexuality was removed as a mental illness. And it's about everything we're talking about. The science was always there, but it took identity and storytelling and politics to get it removed as a mental illness. So if you're interested in this topic, 81 Words, my favorite episode of This American Life. Check it out. Maybe someone can share it in the comments. Speaking of comments, I think Jared just asked me, Ollie, if I send you a video, is it possible for you to play it? I can't play it, but send it to me behind the scenes, and I can have it ready for next week. And unfortunately, Larry, it's that time of the show. It's
that's
time for
right.
the sad
That's right.
music.
You're like me a couple of weeks ago. You have an early
I've got a hard
yes.
end. Yeah, my family and I, we have to drive 50 minutes to get somewhere by an hour from now. So we have to get on the road pretty soon. But before I do, I'm just gonna tell folks I got two things. I actually have two things to share out today, Larry. For once,
Please take it. I got nothing aside from just me, so go for it.
I was on John Lovett's "Love It or Leave It" again this week. Okay. He's kind of bringing me back every quarter. So if you want to hear that episode just came out today. That podcast, and I finally have edited it. My episode on my epic failures in psychology, it's coming out on Monday. It's edited. I filmed this thing in November. I know I've been hyping up for many weeks. So finally, a new episode of the Psych Show is coming out on Monday. So if you go to YouTube.com,
include the delay as one of your epic failures.
I should do a little post. It's a little text. I didn't record a follow-up that said, hey, I recorded this months ago, but I do kind of mention that. So feel free to check that out. And Larry, where can people find more of Trekland this week?
Oh, just go to Larry Nemecek Twitter. I want to thank Jared here for running all of our stats and places for us both. But yeah, at Larry Nemecek on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, that's the same. If you're on Facebook, Larry Nemecek's Trekland is my Facebook page. And it's also my Instagram. So hang out there, LarryNemecek.com. Right now, I've been very just doubling down, like just doing some internal things. But things are about to explode. We've got conventions coming back. I've put in for some virtual panels there. We have. And there's a lot of things brewing. The Voyager documentary is filming. I went before cameras on something I can't say yet, which is going to be very cool. That'll have a lot of people involved. That'll be further down in the year. So yeah, things are bopping along, but right now nothing overt. But I love seeing everybody. I feel like we talked to the chat group less today than usual. So sorry, guys. I was just going to say, Linda at one point did say McCoy's Precordial Thump went out decades ago. Yes, it did. That dates this movie a little bit. And thank you, Nathaniel, for the shout out. Speaking of Star Trek VI, I did do a commentary with Ira Bear about Star Trek VI on one of the DVD sets, if you haven't seen it. So, but everybody, I feel like I've totally not got into the chat today. So, yes, get on the road, man.
Live long and prosper, folks. See you next
time. Trek well, everybody.